Imagine waking up to a world where China quietly surrenders in a trade war they swore they'd never lose, while, at the very same time, millions of working-class Americans discover their own government just cut off their food money. Two headlines that look unrelated, yet they reveal exactly how the balance of global power just flipped. And it's not in the way Washington expected. Today we're going to connect those dots from Beijing's backroom panic to Chuck Schumer's political freefall, and explain why this single week could reshape America's economy, elections, and even your grocery bill. Now, I know what you're thinking. What does a trade deal halfway around the world have to do with whether or not millions of Americans can afford to eat? Fair question. And the answer is everything, because both stories are about the same thing. Leverage. Who has it, who's using it, and who just lost it completely. Let me paint a picture for you. It's late October, 2025. President Trump is on a whirlwind Asia tour signing deal after deal, shaking hands, making headlines. He's just brokered a ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia, countries that have been fighting over borders for years. He's signing trade agreements with Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia. And then comes the big one, China. The country that said it would never back down, that threatened to choke off the world's supply of rare earth minerals, that was ready to slap the United States with export controls so tight it would cripple our tech industry overnight. That China just blinked. Markets rallied, and all of a sudden, the 100% tariffs that were supposed to kick in, gone, deferred, replaced with what they're calling a critical framework for long-term trade relations. In other words, China folded. But here's where it gets interesting. At the exact same moment Trump is shaking hands in Asia, back home in Washington, the government is in day 26 of a shutdown. And it's not just any shutdown. This one is bleeding into the lives of somewhere between 35 and 45 million Americans who depend on federal food assistance every single month. We're talking about SNAP benefits, what used to be called food stamps. And unless something changes fast, those benefits are about to disappear. Not because the money doesn't exist, not because there's some natural disaster or economic collapse, but because a handful of politicians decided to dig in their heels over who gets taxpayer-funded healthcare, specifically illegal immigrants. Now, if you're keeping score at home, you might notice something curious. Trump's approval rating is actually going up during this shutdown. CNN ran the numbers, yes. CNN and even they had to admit that fewer Americans are blaming him this time compared to the shutdown back in 2018 and 2019. Back then, more than 60% of people said it was Trump's fault. Today, less than half. And at the same time, moderate Democrats are starting to break ranks and vote with Republicans to reopen the government. So what changed? That's what we're going to unpack today. Because this isn't just about politics. It's about power. It's about who understands leverage and who doesn't. It's about what happens when you play chicken with people's livelihoods and lose. Let's start where the ripple began, halfway across the world. Trump landed in Southeast Asia with one goal: to lock in trade deals that would reduce America's dependence on China and shift economic power back toward allies we can trust. He wasn't just there to smile for the cameras. He was there to get signatures on paper. And he did. First up, Cambodia. This might sound like a small deal to some folks, but it's actually huge. Cambodia just agreed to eliminate tariffs on 100% of U.S. products. That means American businesses can now sell goods into Cambodia without any trade restrictions. Meanwhile, the U.S. will charge a 19% reciprocal tariff on Cambodian imports except for certain industrial and agricultural goods. In other words, American exporters just got a golden ticket to a market that used to be locked up tight. And Trump made the deal contingent on one more thing: peace. Cambodia and Thailand had to sign a ceasefire agreement to settle their border disputes, and they did. That's the kind of deal-making that makes sense, right? You want access to American markets? Great. Open your markets to us, stop fighting your neighbors, and let's all get back to work. Simple, direct, results-driven. But Trump didn't stop there. He moved on to Malaysia and Vietnam, signing separate deals focused on rare earth minerals, those critical materials that go into everything from smartphones to electric cars to military hardware. For decades, China has controlled somewhere around 70 to 90% of the global rare earth supply. Not because they're the only ones who have the stuff in the ground, plenty of countries do, but because refining rare earths is dirty, expensive, and politically unpopular, so everybody outsourced it to China, and China was happy to take on that job because it gave them leverage. But here's the thing about leverage. It only works if the other side believes you'll actually use it. And when China announced it was going to start requiring approval from Beijing before anyone anywhere in the world could export products made with Chinese rare earths, they thought they were tightening the noose. They thought they were forcing the world to come crawling back, begging for mercy. Instead, they woke up a sleeping giant. Suddenly, countries that had been perfectly happy to let China handle the dirty work of rare earth refining started asking themselves a very uncomfortable question. What if China cuts us off? What if they decide to weaponize the supply chain the same way they just threatened to? And once that question got asked, the answer became obvious. We can't let one country control something this important. We need to build our own capacity. We need to diversify. We need to get serious about rare earth production again. And that's exactly what Trump's deals with Malaysia and Vietnam were about. Securing alternative sources, building new supply chains, making sure that if China ever tries to pull that stunt again, we've got options. Now, there's a professor at MIT, smart guy, studies international trade and geopolitics, who explained this beautifully. He said that there's a fundamental difference between hard assets and soft assets. The U.S. has a lot of soft assets: the credibility of the dollar, the strength of the Federal Reserve, the trust people have in our financial system. Those are real advantages, no question. But they're built on confidence, on perception, on the belief that the system will keep working. China, on the other hand, thought they had a hard asset advantage with rare earths, physical control over something the world needs. And hard assets are powerful, but only if you don't overplay your hand. Because once you threaten to weaponize a hard asset, you force everyone else to find alternatives. And once they do, your leverage is gone. Forever. That's exactly what happened. China overplayed their hand. They thought they could bully the world into submission. Instead, they just convinced everyone that relying on China for rare earths was too risky. So now, countries are scrambling to build new refineries, reopen old mines, and invest in processing capacity. It'll take a few years, sure, but once it's done, China's rare earth monopoly is over, and they know it. Which brings us back to that big headline. China just agreed to halt the 100% tariff increase that was set to kick in next week. They agreed to sit down and negotiate a long-term framework. They agreed to back off their export control threats. Why? Because they realized that if they kept pushing, they'd lose the one advantage they had left. Now, let's be clear. Trump didn't win this fight with kindness. He won it with leverage. He threatened a 155% tariff on Chinese goods. He signed alternative trade deals with countries all over Asia. He made it crystal clear that if China wanted to play hardball, America was ready to walk away and build a whole new economic system without them. And China blinked. The markets loved it, stocks rallied, gold prices hit record highs. Why? Because investors saw stability returning. They saw a framework for long-term trade. They saw the threat of an all-out economic war starting to fade. But here's the part that really matters for folks like us. This wasn't just about Wall Street. It wasn't just about billionaires and hedge funds making money. This was about bringing down costs for everyday Americans. Because when trade flows smoothly, prices drop. When countries aren't slapping tariffs on each other every 5 minutes, goods get cheaper. And when businesses have confidence that the rules aren't going to change overnight, they invest, they hire, they grow. Walmart just announced they're rolling back prices to 2019 levels for Thanksgiving. Turkey, stuffing, all of it. Energy costs are falling, wages are rising, inflation is cooling off. Eggs are half the price they were a year ago, and it's not magic. It's the result of smart, strategic deal-making that prioritizes results over ideology. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, wait a minute, if Trump's doing so great overseas, why is the government still shut down back home? Why are millions of Americans about to lose their food assistance? Great question, and the answer is going to make you angry. Because while Trump was in Asia closing deals and bringing home wins for American workers, back in Washington, Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party were holding those same workers hostage. Let me explain. The House of Representatives passed a clean continuing resolution to keep the government funded. Republicans voted for it, and here's the kicker, several moderate Democrats voted for it too. Senators who represent states where people are hurting, where folks depend on federal programs to get by, where a government shutdown isn't some abstract political game, it's real life. Those Democrats looked at the bill and said, you know what, this makes sense. Let's pass it and move on. But the far-left faction of Senate Democrats said no. Why? Because the bill didn't include taxpayer-funded health care for illegal immigrants. That was the sticking point. Not national security. Not infrastructure. Not helping struggling American families. Nope. The hill they chose to die on was making sure people who entered the country illegally get the same benefits as citizens who've been paying taxes their whole lives. And because of that decision, because of that ideological purity test, the government shut down. And it's been shut down for 26 days now. And starting next week, right around November 1st, somewhere between 35 and 45 million Americans who rely on SNAP benefits are going to see those benefits disappear. Not delayed, not reduced. Gone. Now here's the part that should make your blood boil. Roughly 75 to 80% of those SNAP recipients are Democrats. That means Chuck Schumer just threw somewhere around 30 million of his own voters under the bus to make a political point. Think about that for a second. These are people who voted for him, people who trusted him to look out for their interests, and he chose illegal immigrants over them. The White House put out a statement. This was Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, and she didn't mince words. She said Democrats are holding Americans hostage to give taxpayer-funded health care to illegal aliens, some of whom are violent criminals. And the craziest part? Even CNN couldn't spin this one. Now, I don't say that to pile on CNN. I say it because when a network that's basically spent years opposing Trump has to admit he's winning the blame game, you know something fundamental has shifted. They ran the numbers, they put up the graphics, and here's what they showed. Back in 2018 and 2019, during that last big shutdown, Trump's net approval rating was falling. It dropped several points over the course of the shutdown. More than 60% of Americans said they blamed Trump a great deal for what was happening. The shutdown was eating into his political support, and everyone could see it. Fast forward to today, same situation, right? Government shutdown, services getting cut, federal workers going without paychecks. You'd expect the same result. But that's not what happened. Trump's net approval rating actually went up during this shutdown. Not down, up. And when they asked people who they blamed, less than half said Trump. That's a drop of more than 10 percentage points compared to last time. Why? What changed? Well, for one thing, people can see who's being reasonable and who isn't. The House passed a funding bill. Republicans voted for it. Moderate Democrats voted for it. It was sitting there, ready to go. All the Senate had to do was pass it and send it to the president's desk. But the far left wing said no. And when you're the one saying no to a clean bill that would reopen the government and feed hungry families, it's pretty hard to blame the other guy. Even some Democratic senators started to crack. 3 moderate Democrats crossed the aisle and voted with Republicans to try to end the shutdown. Now, 3 isn't enough to override a filibuster, but it's a start. And it tells you something important. Not every Democrat is willing to go down with this ship. Some of them are looking at the polling, looking at their constituents, and realizing that Chuck Schumer is leading them off a cliff. Vice President J.D. Vance went on TV and said something that really stuck with me. He said that this shutdown isn't the fault of all Senate Democrats. To their credit, some moderate Democrats voted to keep the government open, but the far-left faction of Senate Democrats decided to shut down the people's government anyway. And the people who are going to suffer, families who depend on low-income food programs, TSA agents working without pay, air traffic controllers keeping our skies safe without a paycheck, they're the ones paying the price for this ideological standoff. He also pointed out something personal. He said families, like his working-class families who grew up relying on those programs, are the ones getting hurt. And that hit home for a lot of folks because J.D. Vance didn't grow up rich. He grew up in Ohio, in a struggling community, in a family that needed help to get by. So when he talks about these programs, he's not speaking from some ivory tower. He knows what it's like. And then there's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He went on one of the Sunday shows, and the host asked him, why isn't the president doing more to negotiate? Why isn't he sitting down with Democrats? And Bessent's answer was perfect. He said, what good does it do? They've dug in. The American people are being held hostage to Chuck Schumer's poll numbers. Both of the guys from Brooklyn Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are worried about getting primaried from the left, so they're refusing to budge. Then he laid out the facts. 52 Republican senators have voted 11 times to reopen the government. 3 brave moderate Democrats have joined them. But that's not enough to break a filibuster. So unless more Democrats come to their senses, this thing is going to drag on, and the consequences are getting worse by the day. Bessent also warned that the military is running out of money to pay service members. They scraped together enough to make the mid-October payroll, and they think they can cover the November 1st paycheck. But after that, after mid-November, there's nothing left. Imagine being in the armed forces, serving your country, and being told you're not going to get paid because politicians in Washington can't agree on a budget. It's disgraceful. And it's not just the military. Air traffic control is starting to slow down. Flights are getting delayed. The entire travel system is feeling the strain. The economy is starting to feel it too. When hundreds of thousands of federal workers aren't getting paid, they stop spending money. When millions of families lose their food assistance, they cut back on everything else. It ripples through the whole system. Now, here's where the two stories come together. China folding on trade, Schumer collapsing on the shutdown. At first glance, they seem totally unrelated. One's foreign policy, the other's domestic politics. But they're both about the same thing, leverage. And more importantly, they're both about understanding when you have leverage and when you don't. Trump understood that China's threat to control rare earth exports was a bluff they couldn't sustain. He knew that the moment China weaponized that supply chain, every other country would start building alternatives. So he called their bluff. He signed deals with other countries. He threatened massive tariffs. And China folded because they realized they were about to lose their leverage forever. Schumer, on the other hand, thought he had leverage. He thought he could hold the government hostage, blame Trump, and come out looking like the defender of immigrants and progressive values. But he miscalculated. Badly. Because the American people aren't stupid. They can see who's being reasonable and who's playing games. And when 30+ million of your own voters are about to lose their food money because you're prioritizing illegal immigrants over citizens, that's not leverage. That's political suicide. There's a bigger lesson here, and it's one that applies to all of us, not just politicians. Power isn't about control, it's about credibility. It's about making promises you can keep and following through on them. It's about understanding your position, knowing your limits, and acting accordingly. China thought they had all the power because they controlled rare earths, but they didn't have credibility. Nobody trusted them not to weaponize that control. So the moment they threatened to do exactly that, everyone started looking for exits, and now their power is gone. Schumer thought he had power because Democrats control the Senate, but he doesn't have credibility with the American people right now. His approval rating is tanking. His own party members are breaking ranks. And the longer this drags on, the worse it gets for him. Trump, love him or hate him, has built credibility on one thing: results. He said he'd bring jobs back. He did. He said he'd renegotiate bad trade deals. He did. He said he'd stand up to China. And here we are, watching China back down. People might not like his style. They might not like his tweets or his rallies or his personality. But when he says he's going to do something, he usually does it. And that credibility gives him leverage. So what does all this mean for you? For regular Americans just trying to get by, trying to make sure your savings last, trying to keep food on the table and maybe help out the grandkids a little? Well, a few things. First, it means prices are probably going to keep coming down. When trade wars cool off, goods get cheaper. When supply chains stabilize, costs drop. Walmart rolling back Thanksgiving prices to 2019 levels isn't charity, it's economics. They can afford to do it because their costs are lower, and that's good news for all of us. And second, it means economic confidence is coming back. The stock market rallying, there are signals that investors believe things are getting better. And when investors believe that, companies invest, they hire, they expand, which means more jobs, higher wages, and a stronger economy overall. But here's the thing, none of this was inevitable. China didn't have to fold. They could have kept pushing, and we'd be in an all-out trade war right now, with prices skyrocketing and the economy tanking. Schumer didn't have to shut down the government. He could have passed a clean funding bill, kept food assistance flowing, and fought his ideological battles another day. But neither of them made the smart choice, and now they're paying the price. Which brings me to the biggest lesson of all. Leadership matters. It matters who's making the decisions. It matters whether they're focused on results or ideology. It matters whether they understand leverage or just think they do. And it matters whether they're willing to face hard truths and act decisively, or whether they'd rather play political games and hope it all works out. Right now, we're watching two very different styles of leadership play out in real time. On one side, you've got someone who's moving fast, signing deals, building leverage, and delivering results. On the other side, you've got someone who's dug in, refusing to budge, and watching his support crumble. And the contrast couldn't be clearer. Now, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for or what party to support. That's your decision, and you've earned the right to make it however you see fit. But I'm here to tell you this. Don't just cheer for teams. Measure results. Look at what people actually do, not what they say. Ask yourself, is this making my life better or worse? Is this making the country stronger or weaker? Is this person solving problems or creating them? Because at the end of the day, whether you're running a country or running a household, the principles are the same. You face the hard truths. You make the tough calls. You do what works, not what sounds good. And you take responsibility for the results. So where does this leave us heading into the next chapter? The next few weeks are going to be critical. Will the moderate Democrats find their backbone and vote to reopen the government? Will Schumer finally back down, or will he let 30 million of his own voters go hungry to make a political point? Will the trade framework with China actually hold, or will we be back to square one in 6 months? These are real questions with real consequences for real people. For you, for me, for everyone we care about. But here's what I believe. When leadership is decisive, when deals are smart, and when priorities are straight, put citizens first, focus on results, and don't play games with people's livelihoods. Good things happen. Progress gets made, problems get solved, and regular folks start seeing their lives improve in tangible ways. If you believe Americans deserve honest leadership and smart deals that actually help people like you, click the like button so this story reaches more people. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of what's really coming next, because as you can see, the balance of power is changing faster than anyone expected. And the more of us who understand what's really happening, the better decisions we can all make for ourselves, for our families, and for the country we're leaving to the next generation. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I know it's a lot to take in, but these are the stories that actually matter. Take care of yourselves. And remember, don't just watch the show. Understand the game. Because once you see how the pieces really move, you can't unsee it. And that's when you start making better calls for yourself and the people you love.